You have guessed it. We are in the season of stewardship. Not an official season of the Christian church, but my guess is there are more Baptist churches that observe stewardship season than Lent. In the fall each year, we give some attention to the extravagance of God and our call for an extravagant response. And the coming weeks, that is exactly our focus. We're going to look at the extravagance, 4 extravagant stories in each of the 4 Gospels. Today, starting with Matthew and the extravagant wedding feast. Several years ago, when my daughter Haley and Chris got married, I got to host an extravagant wedding feast. I'm sympathetic to the story here. Melissa and I embraced the traditional role of hosting a big feast following the wedding ceremony. I was stuck between my need both for a leave of absence from my work to do the details and the need to take on a second job to pay for the details. But the truth is, I was spared a lot of the tastings and the going to look at flowers and the going to check the menu and then the going back to check the menu. There are lots of details. Should we do a seated meal or a buffet? Band or DJ? Now show us where the wedding cake will be displayed and where the buffet line will begin. What is the flow? I have learned that's important. You need to know what the flow is. Melissa came home after one of these meetings, having met with the people at the country club where it was being hosted. And she said, "I need you to write a check." And I said, "I need to sit down." I was braced for a high amount. She told me the amount, and it was high as I expected. I gulped. I got the checkbook. It was high. But then on reflection, I said, I need to applaud you for holding expenses down. This is frankly not quite as high as I expected it to be. She said, "You do know this is a deposit." Oh gosh. The wedding invitation list, a whole different matter. We could have taken each person on the wedding invitation list to bones for what we were being charged for the buffet. And we were inviting people I did not know. I'm reading through the list asking, "Who is this?" Melissa said, "Oh, you remember her. She played on Haley's soccer team." She played on Haley's soccer team. Could she come and not eat, maybe? I mean, that's... So I have some idea of what it's like to pull off a wedding feast. Details and color schemes and invitations that match the formality or informality of the event. Menus and DJs and cake and groom's cake. But when we set out the invitations, nearly everybody said yes. And I was counting. The man in the parable went to all of that same trouble, all of those checklists, all the details, the menu, made the guest list. He finished the list, he gave it to the servants and said, "Go invite these people. Go invite them to this great party I'm throwing." Now, before I continue, remember, this is a parable, or some scholars designate it an allegory. That is, to suggest that every person, group, noun in the story stands for a specific reference in Israel's story. So as I'm telling the story, listen for it at 2 different levels. Listen for the allegory, the parable parts as I tell it. See what connections you start making with Israel's story. Well, anyway, he finished the guest list. He gave it to the servants. He said, "Go invite these people to the party." And then he waited and waited, and no reply. Nobody said they're coming. Each day, walks to the mailbox, nothing. Nobody invited to the party said yes. So he gathers up another group of servants and says, go tell this guest list about the party I'm throwing for my son. It's going to be a big deal. Oxen, ribeye, it's going to be quite a shindig. Go tell these folks they're welcome to come. And keep in mind, welcome to come is probably not the right phrase. When the king is the one inviting, you go, right? I mean, it's like your boss saying, Steve, I'd like to invite you to fly to Pittsburgh next week and meet the new clients we have in Pittsburgh. You have not really just been invited to go to Pittsburgh, right? You're calling Delta, you're going to Pittsburgh. This is the king inviting you to come. Tell the second group they've been invited to a party thrown by the king. The second group of servants goes out, guest list in hand. They go to the list of folks door by door and say, you have been invited to the king's house for a party. Do you understand? It's a party being thrown by the king. It's the king's house. And they just shrugged it off. They made light of it. One of them went back to his farm. Another one went back to his business. And those were the polite responses. In some cases, the servants were beaten up and even killed. Now, are you remembering to listen with allegory in mind? In some cases, those prophets told of a coming banquet, told about the good news, were even killed. Well, the king is furious. This time, he doesn't send servants to call on that guest list. He sends troops. And instead, he decides to make up a new guest list. And guess who is included on the new one? Absolutely anybody. Not just the chosen people, everybody, anybody. Go up and down Peachtree, tell anybody you see they're welcome to come to the party. Go to Ashby Street, go to Midtown, go to Cheshire Bridge. You tell everybody they are welcome to the party. The banquet table is set, ribeyes are on the grill. It is my party. I choose to invite people that would scandalize you to see them. You good church people would be scandalized to see who was invited. And he invited them all. Now, clearly, this is symbolic. Jesus tells us right up front it's a parable, but it doesn't make it any easier to take. There are people invited to this party that we're just not sure about. Some of these people are the people that when you're stopped at a stoplight in some parts of town and somebody starts walking at the stop cross, you reach over and lock the door. Just quietly lock the door. Those people are on this list. We sing, "There is a wideness in God's mercy," and we love that song when it's about us. But we don't really want everybody invited. Everybody invited? Part of the extravagant scandal of the gospel is that the king has invited everybody to the party. Now, generally speaking, I admire prudence. Weigh the cost, measure twice, cut once. Stay within the budget, give a little of your income away, save the leftovers. Prudence is a characteristic that most of us admire. But try to find a story about the nature of God that is more prudent than extravagant. God's nature is big invitation, lots of extravagance. The sower who's slinging seeds onto rocky soil, oh, they won't grow, but I got seeds to spare. The merchant who found a pearl of great value, sold everything to go get it. The stories about the king are never stories of prudence. It's the nature of God to be wildly extravagant and radically inclusive. The God of this story and throughout the biblical witness is the God who, with loud, inclusive embrace, sends servants running through the streets, inviting everyone to the feast. And this picture of an inclusive, inviting God is much easier to take in the abstract than the specific. God's church has not always done this well in the specific. A friend of mine went to pastor a prominent church in Kentucky. The pastoral portraits on the wall, kind of the who's who of Baptist life. It was an honor, a great call to go to this distinguished church. Soon after he got there, a relocated refugee community moved in. And then they started coming to church. And then a lot of them started coming to church. And then they had to call a called church business meeting to discuss what happens when everybody is invited. Speaking of refugees, did you know that in 2007, the city of Clarkston banned soccer? Do y'all know this story? The people were not allowed to play soccer in the city parks in Clarkston. What happened, you all know that Clarkston became a very popular place that resettlement agencies were putting refugees for a long time. A group of boys formed an informal soccer club. They called themselves the Fugees. It was short for refugees. They had a coach. They were boys aged 9 to 17. They were playing in the town park. But the sight of these boys in the park was a symbol of unwanted change. And so the mayor issued a decree, no more soccer in the town park. I wonder, I don't know, but I wonder if the area churches went out to the park and told all of those boys who were not able to play soccer anymore that there was a feast at the church and everybody is invited. Well, the king's party is buzzing. There's dancing and refills and laughter and energy, and the king straightens his tie and goes to greet the gathered and electric celebration that's going on. And when he walks into the room, it's hard to even describe who's there. I mean, there's Parthians and Medes and Elamites and dwellers of Mesopotamia. There are folks of every denomination, ethnicity, and orientation. There are saints and derelicts, pious and pitiful. Not all of these people deserve to be at a party thrown by the king, which is exactly the point. It's not about anybody's merit. It's about the character of the king. The king has invited everyone. There may be folks I never would have invited, but the king is more extravagant than I am. We may see people in the room we don't want in the room, but the king is more inclusive than we are, and it's not our party. And by the way, if any of those people show up here, they must be welcome too, because this isn't our party either. And then a really strange thing happens. The king notices somebody in the buffet line who's not wearing a wedding robe. Remember, this is a parable. The extravagant king invited everybody. This guy shows up, but he's completely disrespectful of the honor of it. This guy has shown up with no sense of reverence or appreciation. He's not willing to change anything about himself out of gratitude for being included. And the king walks up to him and says, "Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding robe?" And there he stands in his shorts and flip-flops and Aerosmith t-shirt. Didn't even take his ball cap off. Everybody's welcome, but you don't get to just show up to the party with a disrespectful smirk and a ball cap. The invitation to the party comes with a responsibility. And there's been a lot of attention given to the last verse. Many are called, but few are chosen. Some suggest that this supports predetermination or predestination, but I agree with Ben Witherington, who said this: the criteria for exclusion has to do with the person's own failure to bring and wear a wedding garment, not the king's failure to give him one. The judgment in this story comes to the one who has accepted the invitation to the feast but refused to conform to the new standards of behavior. As one scholar notes, he accepted the invitation of the gospel but refused to conform his life to the gospel. It is the nature of some to refuse to be shaped by the call of the gospel, but it is the nature of God to keep inviting, and to keep inviting all of us. Generosity and creativity are at the heart of God's nature. Inclusion is the voice of God's call, and outrageous extravagance is God's economy. And those who accept the invitation and do conform to what it means to be a part of that party become people of generous and abundant spirits as well. How will you respond to having been invited? We stand and sing and respond to God's invitation and call in the context of worship.